hello. My name is Chitra Golestani, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the Wilmette Institute's webinar today entitled Erased but Not Forgotten, Reclaiming North Nashville's Legacy. This is part one of a two-part series because we want to look at the issues and spend a lot of time also looking at how to contribute to meaningful change. As many of our viewers know, the Wilmette Institute is an online educational institution providing university and extension courses dedicated to the building of a new society through transformative education. Our interdisciplinary courses aim to develop the capacity of participants to contribute meaningfully to the current discourses in society, exploring both the spiritual and material dimensions of our collective advancement. Just a few announcements before we get started. Those of you who stay current with the Wilmette Institute may have followed to know that we have a rigorous graduate certificate program in social transformation and have now distilling those 4 courses for youth, young adults, and young professionals. So the next one coming up is Towards Oneness and Justice, Transformative Approaches to Anti-Racism. This is a 7-week extension course designed for youth and young adults. The series includes weekly Zoom sessions, interactive activities, and community projects. We also have another extension course coming up, Baha'i Archives, how to collect, arrange, maintain, and promote archives. We know that knowing history affects the present and the future, so we welcome you for that. Next slide. We also will have a part 2 of this webinar series, which will be March 30th. Continuing with the part 2, we welcome you. Please invite others to join. And this will also explore the power of race unity and justice, community building, and insights from the Baha'i Framework for Action. So we hope you'll join us for that as well. We're almost ready to get started with today's webinar, noting that it is live streamed on YouTube and accessible later on all the podcast platforms. So we hope you enjoy the program. During the presentation, you're invited to post questions in the Q&A section afterwards, after the program, in which case we hope to have a very rich discussion. And throughout, there will be polls where hopefully you can contribute also in that way as well. I will also note that the views and opinions expressed in the Wilmette Institute webinars and academic programs are those of the speakers. And now I have the pleasure to introduce our webinar. And as you know, it is entitled Erased but Not Forgotten, Reclaiming North Nashville's Legacy with Miss Sue Ballou Sinclair. Ms. Sinclair has held leadership roles in the U.S. and internationally. As a national director of the Psychiatric Nurse Practitioners, she received the Outstanding Professional Award in 2010. Now partially retired, Sue, very much partially, I would underline that triple. She serves on the board of Partners in Racial Justice, focused on unity and healing, and she also does Copper to Gold, another amazing space which fosters race amity. She advises the Children's Theater Company and helps develop a course on racism for the National Baha'i Race Working Group. Sue creates a monthly Spirit of Blackness program and serves on the local spiritual assembly of the Baha'is of Nashville. A Baha'i since 19 years old, her work centers on racial justice, healing, and building spiritually just communities. Without further ado, we welcome dear Sue Sinclair.
Good
Thank you
evening,
for being
everyone.
with us.
I'm very happy to be here and I'm happy to be able to share this presentation with you. Um, I live in Nashville, Tennessee, as Chitrish mentioned, and I became aware of a part of Nashville that is, as you will find, is suffering some issues that we are going to be talking about. The title of the program that I'm going to be sharing tonight is called uh, Erased but Not Forgotten, Reclaiming North Nashville's Legacy. And the areas that we're going to cover in this, it all has to do with North Nashville. And the areas that we're going to be covering is how it was a thriving community, even though it was redlined, which means it was segregated, and those who were Black could only buy homes in that area. And it also was suffered under segregation policies of the Jim Crow era, but it managed to develop a thriving community in spite of all of that. Until the I-40 Interstate Freeway came through the middle of that community. As a result of that, it developed poverty. The community became deteriorated. The individuals who had businesses and community organizations all became disenfranchised, and the school to prison pipeline came into being, drugs developed, and gentrification is the latest harm or violence that has taken place with that community. Before I dive deeper into the program, into the presentation, I'd like to read this particular quote. Now is the time for steadfastness. Now is the ripe moment for the stalwart warriors and champions to show forth courage and to demonstrate their heroism in the arena of service. Until such time as God will exalt his cause, will remove the distress and anxiety of his friends and trusted servants, and glorify those who were brought low among his creatures, to make them spiritual leaders among men, and to make them God's heirs. The early community life of North Nashville, as I mentioned earlier, was a thriving community. There was home ownership from the time it was first identified as a community in the 1880s until 1968. It had community supported schools. It had two HBCU universities, Fisk University and Tennessee State University. It had a medical college, Meharry Medical College, which still exists, all of these. It had Meharry General Hospital and a school of dentistry. There were successful businesses. There was active community organizations. There was an entertainment industry that attracted some of the best and brightest of entertainers and poets and literary individuals to Jefferson Street, which was the main thoroughfare of this community. And it had a thriving Baha'i community in Nashville. However, there was a letter from Coralie Cook, who was a Baha'i at that time, that she wrote to Abdul Baha. This is an excerpt from that letter. And it stated, knowledge of the progress of the colored people during their 50 years of freedom has astounded the world and incited the envy and hatred of those who prophesied their extinction and argued their inability to work for themselves. In the midst of unfriendly surroundings, they have accumulated some $7 billion worth of property and raised $1.5 million in the past year alone for educational work. Coming out of slavery with 95% of their whole number unable to read or write, To say that number is reduced to only 30% is an advance surpassing that of the whites during the same period. Next. This is a video presentation of what Nashville, the North Nashville was before I-40 came through.
They don't know.
Jefferson Street represented a cross-section of what the American dream would have looked like for many African Americans coming out of slavery.
This street used to be somewhat elite. Professional people, people from the universities.
You had 3 thriving historically black colleges. So you would see medical students in their white jackets. You would see college students with their book bags.
Artists, poets, and writers, the Jubilee singers, people like Aaron Douglas.
You got some of the oldest and most important African American churches in the city. People started businesses that were successful.
African Americans can be themselves without being Jim Crowed.
Everybody in this room that's entertainers actually performed somewhere on Jefferson Street.
When you think of places that define a time, a people, and a city, Jefferson Street is one of those for Nashville.
I'm going to tell you what killed Jefferson Street. The building of Interstate 40. They bulldozed and bombed 300 homes.
Area across the street was cleared out. No pre-construction meetings, no community meetings.
It's loud, it's noisy, it kills the property value.
The city just stepped aside and let the community fail.
If it wasn't enough to take away housing, to take away history, simply gentrification, and that's just natural, there's nothing natural about it. Those areas are targeted.
And I see them riding, first thing I say, they trying to find something to buy.
You do not have to make a desperate option to sell your home. It's not that we don't know that they're here, it's that there's no trust.
At least 2 tornadoes touched down.
Deadly tornadoes sweeping through Tennessee.
And the death rate of COVID-19 for Black people more than twice as high.
Tens of millions of people are out of work.
This is a neighborhood that has had its share of bad breaks. And so to have Mother Nature not be on your side is just another strike. I'm not certain if we've struck out.
Right now we're at the stage of Jefferson Street becoming something else. The question is, who is determining what that something else is going to be?
We can't hear you.
Sorry, I was muted. As you can see, Jefferson Street of North Nashville was a thriving community until the Interstate 40 came through and had a huge impact on the community. In 1957, there was an intentional decision for I-40 system construction with deliberate calculation to go through the Black community. Black neighborhoods, they found to be more disposable than white enclaves, even though it was a cataclysmic event for North Nashville. None of the plans nor their implications were discussed with the local residents, even though the route would virtually disembowel North Nashville. Next. This is a quote I'd like to introduce regarding the importance of justice before we move on. O Son of Spirit, the best beloved of all things in my sight is justice. Turn not away therefrom if thou desirest me. and neglect it not, that I may confide in thee. By its aid thou shalt see with thine own eyes, and not through the eyes of others, and shalt know of thine own knowledge, and not through the knowledge of thy neighbor. Ponder this in thy heart, how it behooveth thee to be. Verily, justice is my gift to thee, and the sign of my loving kindness. Set it then before thine eyes. This was written by Baha'u'llah. Next. The impact of I-40 caused poverty. As a result, contrary to this second hidden word of Baha'u'llah on justice, a public hearing was held in Nashville in 1957 at the county courthouse, regarding the I-40 interstate designed to run through the city and connect Nashville with Memphis. Although the hearing was required by law, the announcement of the hearing was only posted in post offices in white neighborhoods, and the date on the notices were incorrect from the actual date of the hearing. The press was not notified. The choice to run the interstate through the Black community was endorsed, even though another route, less damaging to a community, had been initially made. The abrupt change to run the interstate through the thriving Black community was a deliberately calculated, intentional choice based on the belief that, as I mentioned earlier, Black neighborhoods are more disposable. Because no notice of the plans for an I-40 did not reach the Black citizens, attorneys for businesses in North Nashville learned very late of the plan. They immediately sued to stop the construction of the highway through the middle of the Black community. The complaint charged that construction of the highway segment, as planned, will cause substantial damage, erecting a physical barrier between this predominantly Negro area and other parts of Nashville. Next. Child poverty became, as a result of the disengagement of businesses and organizations that had stores and other kinds of opportunities there for families to make a living. Poverty in this zip code became a stunning 42%, as noted in the Brookings Institute 2018 report. However, I did find a later report that was stated in 2021 that it had been reduced to 27%, which is still much larger than the 14% national average. The 2021 census also estimated that in this 37208 zip code, 70% of the individuals were Black, and the poverty rate had doubled from the Nashville's average. Next. There's a quote here from the Baha'i International Community about the issues of having to do with the sustainable development. Intractable challenges. There are material aspects that have to do with intractable challenges, and there are social ills, distortion of relationships and values, eradication of poverty of all kinds being the greatest challenge, and the need to transform personal values and qualities of relationships that allow poverty to exist was an additional challenge and is the greatest challenge facing the planet. When we talk about material challenges, we're talking about housing that's inadequate. Sorry, I'm getting hoarse. We're talking about substandard housing, substandard schools, for-profit prisons. And when we talk about intangible, we're talking about systemic racism, poverty and inequality, politics, access to health care being denied, environmental injustices, and entrenched attitudes and beliefs that are harmful to the Black community. Next. There were environmental hazards, and these environmental hazards were such things as indoor triggers of particulate matter and so on that caused asthma and other respiratory conditions. There was also recycled tires that were used to put down on playgrounds as mulch that released a toxic substance into the air. In addition, residents were affected by landfill debris, including construction debris like shingles, concrete, as debris containing asbestos, soil contaminated with gasoline, and other toxic materials. There's a high incidence of cancer, asthma, and other chronic diseases, and the residents suspected that these were problems linked to the landfill and the other things that I've mentioned. Next. The World Health Organization had a definition of violence. The violence that had the intentional use of physical force or power that threatened or actually operated against oneself, another person, or against a group or community. And in this case, we have to think in terms of environmental injustice as relates to this community. This either results in or has a high likelihood of resulting in injury, death, psychological harm, and maldevelopment or deprivation. And as mentioned earlier, some of the issues that I mentioned are the results. In the 37208 zip code area, this area ranked high compared to other zip codes for societal problems, including families below the poverty level, percentage of youth not enrolled in school, and total crime index. There were other outside factors that needed to be considered. These were things that had to do with that caused mental health issues, behavioral health issues. Next. When we think of what's happening in this neighborhood and in other neighborhoods like it, we have to think about what we should be doing, especially those of the society who have the wealth and means to be able to accomplish something. Baha'u'llah states, "O children of dust, tell the rich of the midnight sighing of the poor, lest heedlessness lead them into the path of destruction and deprive them of the tree of wealth. To give and to be generous are attributes of mine. Well is it with him that adorneth himself with my virtues." Next. Before we talk about the school to prison pipeline, I would like to invite Bob James, who grew up in North Nashville and has some information to share with us regarding what it was like before I-40 and what it was like after I-40. Bob, although Bob no longer lives in that area, he is a psychologist and lives and works in North Carolina. Still, he has something to say. Welcome, Bob.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here. And as Sue said, I grew up in Nashville and went through the school system there. The teachers took a tremendous interest in the students, tried to help them to aspire to their greatest potential, tried to find various projects or, in my case, a science fair that I could attend to learn more. We tried to find various opportunities. Many of the teachers and the parents knew one another. And again, it was almost like a family where everyone kind of looked out for one another. But in terms of North Nashville itself, as was mentioned before, it did have a very thriving business. And it was almost self-sufficient, where there were restaurants, there were banks, there were insurance agencies, you name it, it was there. And my family contributed to a lot of those businesses where some family members owned hotels. My dad actually owned a salvage antique store that also sold lumber, and it was considered the largest Black-owned business in Tennessee, actually, at that time. And then I want to show a picture, see if I can pull that up. So this is, put it on. This is the Odie Center, which is across the street from Fisk University. It's at 18th and Jefferson Street. It was established in 1904. It was the first Black-owned grocery store in Nashville. And by 1964, it became the largest Black-owned grocery store in Tennessee. And this was not only a grocery store, it also had an insurance agency, it had a laundromat, it had a shoe department, it had, there were some other things that it had as well. So as many of you know, there we go. So this again is on Jefferson Street. But John Lewis, who is pictured here, attended Fisk University, and he would go to that store on a regular basis. And it wasn't until much later, more recently actually, when my niece was talking to John Lewis, and he realized that Tracy, that's my niece, that her last name was Odie. And so he asked to speak to her and told her that the Odie family helped him when he was arrested. They paid his bill, they paid his food, they took care of him when he was in Nashville. This is what a lot of the Black families did in North Nashville. They took care of one another. And this is another picture of my other niece, Tracy's sister, Lisa, and her husband with John Lewis. So I want to go back to the store again. And this store not only has importance to the Black community itself, but to the faith as well. Louis Gregory, as many of you are aware, also attended Fisk University. He would frequent this store on a regular basis, and at some point he would go there and he would start talking about the Baha'i faith. My uncle heard about the faith. He was a student at Tennessee State, went to some firesides and so forth, and he became a Baha'i in 1934 through the instruction of Louis Gregory, through the effort of Louis Gregory. And he became the first Baha'i youth in Tennessee in 1934. Now, my dad was working at this particular store when he was 17 years old, and would listen to Louis Gregory talk to my uncle about the faith. And he decided he would also become a Baha'i, and it was this is my dad, he became a Baha'i in 1938, so he also was one of the first youth in Tennessee. As it relates to the businesses again, and the entertainment, how individuals would come there, and I can recall we lived about 2 blocks from Jefferson Street on Hyman Street, and we would hear the different entertainers around Jefferson Street, and we would go there. And I can recall Muhammad Ali being there. And we all went, we saw his huge bus that was there, and he was out mingling with a large crowd of people on 18th and Jefferson. Again, a real community. It was just wonderful to live there. We knew all the neighbors. This is my mom, and she also became a Baha'i. She was the next door neighbor to my dad, childhood sweethearts, and they became Baha'is. So the neighbors all knew one another on the street. Matter of fact, several blocks, we knew almost everyone there. It was a very engaging community. And I know I'm short on time, but want to mention the HBCUs. It was just wonderful to have so many near us. And we went to, with Meharry Medical College and the hospital and the dentist school that was there. My understanding is the majority of doctors and dentists in the United States graduated from Meharry and Howard University. This was up until the 60s. And again, it just shows the importance of what was taking place in Nashville. Trying to see if there's anything else. In terms of TSU, which again is also down the street. All of these schools are within blocks of one another. But Tennessee State University would have its homecoming on Thanksgiving. And that's a time for families. Thanksgiving is a time for families. And we would go there to Tennessee State for their homecoming. We had our own family reunion on Thanksgiving. So as a family, we all went to the game, the homecoming. Again, just a wonderful experience. The crime rate was not as high, and we felt a little more assured to be able to walk around in the neighborhood during those particular times. There was crime, but not as bad as it is now. So I will stop there. So that's all.
We are going to have a poll now, so I'm here to help you with this poll. We have 2 or 3 polls in store for you. And this first one asks, do you have personal experience of any other neighborhoods where a highway disrupted community life? So please go ahead and tell us the name of the community, the state or the province, and any other brief details you want to share. I'm going to give you a minute and a half, maybe. We'll see if we can do it that quickly. For those who are on YouTube, our tech support is going to be showing, there it is. So we have some music and we have a QR code for those who are on YouTube, watching on YouTube. You can also participate in our poll. You'll see the question there when you use that QR code on your phone.
God sufficeth, say God sufficeth all things, above all things, and nothing in the heavens or in the earth, but God sufficeth. Verily it's in himself the knower, the sustainer. Verily it's in himself the knower, the sustainer. The omnipotent, the omnipotent, the omnipotent.
We have about 20 seconds or so.
The omnipotent. Say God, sufficeth all things, above all things, and nothing in the heavens or in the earth, but God sufficeth. Say God, sufficeth all things, above all things, and nothing in the heavens or in the earth, but God sufficeth. Verily it's in himself the knower,
Thank you. So now we're gonna have a look at the results of the poll. I think Jocelyn is going to have to publish those results if there are any results. Ah. Okay. I can't actually see the results, Jocelyn. Can you see them?
Maybe while Jocelyn's getting that ready,
Right.
I can share a little bit. As many of you know, members of the Wilmette Institute have been spending a lot of time in Durham because of our 5-year partnership with North Carolina Central University. And when we had gone to a section downtown where it's unfortunately gentrification is taking its hold, I saw a sign that said Black Wall Street. And so upon getting to know the different community organizations and so forth, someone showed me that Haiti, the neighborhood Haiti in Durham, North Carolina, was disrupted by urban renewal and construction by a freeway in the 1960s, and the destruction of that Haiti neighborhood displaced thousands of families and businesses and left it basically at a huge loss and the impact they've never recovered from. And they too are in the fight, against gentrification. So I thought I would mention that.
Thank you,
Nikki's
Chitra.
ready.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, and so we can all see this on the screen, I think, but we have Florence in Alabama built Dr. Hicks Boulevard through the Black neighborhood, removing Black-owned businesses. And this person is not sure of the year, but I'm sure that we can do some research and find that out. And then Carol says, I grew up near Washington, D.C., and there were 2 neighborhoods that were disrupted by highways. She was young, so she doesn't remember the names. And then Africville in Halifax, I guess that's Halifax in Canada, yeah, Nova Scotia, was a thriving community of Black people who were moved out, I believe, for construction of a highway leading to a major bridge. And then there's South Bend, Indiana, and also Lansing, Michigan. Some of this person's high school friends made a documentary on YouTube, wow, called They Even Took the Dirt. Thank you for that. And Lisa is here. I'm from Nashville. Greenway neighborhood in Fort Worth, Texas. Okay. Zip code 37209, just next to the area Sue is talking about. I do remember the construction of the interstate. And then there's North Babylon, New York. Highway 231, Kansas City, Missouri, Interstate 71. And also on the west side of Kansas City with I-35. There's a lot of experience here we have. Thank you for sharing this.
My hope is that we are in some degrees informal here. And knowing that Lisa is here, is it possible for us to bring her up as a panelist? I'm getting ready to talk about her, but maybe she would have a couple of things to say as well, if it's possible to do that.
There she is. I believe she's on.
Okay, great. Oh, great. Okay. Well, let me go ahead and do this, and then she can add to it whatever she chooses to add to it. So this is an interview that I had with her, and she shared with me her experience with one of the schools, that the schools became a main school to prison pipeline. And this was part of what the deterioration of the community ended up looking like. teachers used Bob mentioned to me, and he may have forgotten to mention it when he was talking about it here, but he mentioned to me that when he was going to school, the teachers were all Black. But by the time he was leaving high school, the teachers were all white. And so that makes a big difference, doesn't it? They used harsh words to students because they dressed differently or wore their hair differently. They were detained for minor code violations. The children would not know why or would get emotional as a result. This led to 72-hour holds, putting them under the control of medical doctors who drugged them with meds that were meant for mental or behavioral conditions. Next.
I actually am
Went on
here.
to-
Just don't know how to turn my camera on. Sorry.
Okay. I'll let you talk in just 1 second. I'll just share what I have here, and then you can share your thoughts. So when taken off the drugs, she said that there were normal reactions of anger and emotional distress, no longer masked, and so they acted out, which is what children would do. One of the things that she said to me that I thought was powerful is that all they really needed was love. I'm going to let you talk about this whole incarcerated issue and the group home that you developed to take people out of the system, Lisa.
Thank you. And I'm trying to see, I could blur the background, I guess. I'm trying to undo my camera, but I guess it doesn't matter. You can see me there. Yeah, so.
We can hear you.
Oh, good. So I only heard part of what you were saying. Start my video. It's blurred out, although it says it. I'm not going to worry about it. So when I ended up moving here, as my uncle Bob James mentioned, that's when they started desegregating this area also. So majority of our teachers were white. They were not African American. But in reference to I used to help transition people back into the community who had previously been incarcerated. And a lot of the children went to, there's a school here called Pearl Cone, which is one of the main high schools in the 37208 area, as well as the other schools have changed names probably about 4 or 5 times because they keep repurposing if they want it to be a magnet school or all African American school, or like they just keep changing them. And so, but the several group homes that I worked with, a lot of the youth who would get in trouble there was an understanding that if you got incarcerated and you were in high school, they will test you to see your competency level. And if you score low enough, you can be placed into a group home. You then get inserted in the developmentally, they're called DO9 classes, and you'll be put in those. So you're in the classes with developmentally or children who have behavioral concerns. But if you get put in the group home, if you score low enough, you could go through the group home for a 9-month period and get your record expunged. And this was, it's a whole process that a lot of people know about. A lot of adults don't know about it, but you could, commit or do whatever and get your license expunged or get your record expunged. So a lot of the youth, all of the youth that I worked with when we had our group home to transition them back into the community, they didn't really need to be there. Their parents just were busy. They didn't want to be bothered. But even the way that the children were addressed in school, kind of going back to that other slide that you said, it's when an action would happen with a white student versus a Black student, the words that would describe the behavior is what would cause, say, an African American student was aggressive, and a white student was emotional, right? And so the aggressive student would have the officers come in and, have, treat them a certain way or talk to them a certain way. And it just created this real negative experience. And I witnessed it a lot. I just moved to Nashville from California, so I was kind of in the middle of just seeing how the South, and I don't know, it was my first Southern experience also, so it was very different. But yeah, after the 9 months, they were expunged and they transitioned to the community. And then I'm looking at, I didn't actually get a chance to see the presentation, Sue, so I apologize. And let me see here. Yeah, a lot of the kids were transitioned to alternative schools, and they came from all over Tennessee. They were appointed to be in Nashville, not just in 37208, but a lot of the kids came from the 37208 area. I don't know if you had a question or something. I only got the back half because I was trying to do the technical stuff, so I'm sorry. I can't hear you.
I just thought it would be meaningful for you to share a bit about your experience with this. And so thank you. That was very helpful to have you say it in your own words. Okay, so let's move on. Next slide, please. So the whole school to prison pipeline, it was something, and I know many people have heard of it. It's taken place in not just in North Nashville, but in a lot of different areas. And before I start reading this, Bob has indicated that he has something to share. So please go ahead, Bob.
Yeah, I just wanted to reemphasize what you mentioned earlier, that when I was in school, it was still segregated. All Black teachers, all Black principals, and so forth. And I really do feel that with that change, where integration started occurring around 1967 after I graduated from high school, and that's when things began to change, where when I was in school, there was respect for the teachers, and the teachers respected the students. And once the integration started, my sense was many of the white teachers began to feel that Black students cannot achieve, so the effort was not put forth to assist. And when the attention and the love and the compassion is not there for the students, they can feel it. And many times, many will begin to act out as a result of that. But just wanted to emphasize that point, that it did make a difference, I feel, in terms of how I was treated when I was in school, as opposed to when Lisa was there.
And I noticed that you had you meaning Sue had put that 37208 had challenges. 37208 was identified as the #1 school to prison pipeline in the United States. And this was, I guess, within the last 5 to 6 years. Soledad O'Brien did a whole documentary on 37208 and how it became the school to prison pipeline. Interesting enough, this same neighborhood that used to be an all Black community is predominantly white community now, where nobody wanted to live there before. Tons of gentrification. And during the pandemic, the Ritz-Carlton bought up a huge portion of the neighborhood to build a luxury community in the same community that is considered the #1 school to prison pipeline for the residents who have lived there for all of these years and have bought them out, moved them out, and are changing the whole kind of landscape of what is happening to the community now. And some of the resources are now being put into the community that were not there before, because the cultural landscape is changing, and did it under everyone's nose that nobody knew was happening. So it's just really interesting watching. And Sue Brianna Latham is also on here, who is from the area also. So I don't know if you were aware, but I know she.
No, I wasn't.
Yeah.
But we've got to move on a little bit
Yeah.
now, though. Thank you so much, both Bob and Lisa, for coming on and sharing your experiences. So Lisa talked something about the school to prison pipeline, but it starts at the cradle. And I was really surprised when I came across this. And this was a quote from the executive director of the American Civil Liberties Union that stated that the reason why is because of the inequitable health care and lack of resources for mothers in marginalized communities. There was lack of proper nutrition and untreated trauma that starts at birth. And I would venture to say, even before birth, now that we're realizing that fetuses in the womb are affected by what happens with the mother and even with the father. Research studies released in June of 2016 stated that Black students are nearly 4 times as likely to be suspended as white and nearly twice as likely to be expelled. Black preschoolers, this is crazy. You're talking about kids who are 3 and 4 and 5 years old. Black preschoolers are 3.6 times more likely to receive 1 or more out of school suspensions. Next. So just to encapsulate this, the 37208 neighborhood posts the highest incarceration rate, as Lisa mentioned, in the nation. It's 14% compared, and the next closest to it was a distant number, and I believe it was like 9% or 10% at the most. Ranked high compared to other zip codes for societal problems also. The total crime index, the percentage of youth not enrolled in school, and families below the poverty level. Next. This is a quote from the Baha'i International Community. States' responsibilities to advance the well-being of their people must be paramount in the formation of public policy. Decision-making, therefore, needs to be structured in ways that ensure active advancement of the common good over other more limited concerns. Many spaces in which law and policy are determined today are heavily influenced by other actors motivated, at least in part, by interests such as the accumulation of financial profit or political power. The Baha'i International Community, by the way, is an organization, and if I am correct, it's the only faith-based organization that is allowed to present to the UN white papers about different topics that they're struggling with in discussing them. The UN meaning. Next. So as we continue to talk about the violence in school intervention, I want to talk about Maxia Lizarraga. She is a social worker, and she was hired as a clinical therapist at the same high school that Lisa mentioned. She became the director of the Family Resource Center, which she created, and worked there for 10 years. She worked with students and parents. She led a large outreach to community once a month that included church members, parents, students, and others. Her statement was that prisons are built according to the 4th grade failure rate. And I emphasize that because it's sick. Because it has been determined that if a child cannot read and do math by then, he will not get through high school and will drop out. The next step will be to connect with what they know in their community, which are gang members. The persons they look up to are the baddest gang member in the community. Next. In her work with elementary school children, she asked certain questions. An example was, what do you want to be when you grow up? The answer was often, I want to be a gangster like my uncle. When asked why, the answer was, because he buys my clothes and tennis shoes, brings food for us, takes care of us, and makes sure my mom is safe. The children know who the gangsters are and what they do, but they don't see it as something bad like outsiders do. Maxia also stated that many high school students will say they want to be plumbers or electricians, but the trades have been removed from the schools, a tragic and heart-wrenching circumstance. Then she stated, I have been to so many funerals. And these were funerals of her children, her teens. Next. Maxia created an informal survey to learn how the students are emotionally, mentally, and physically dealing with the deaths by violence in the community. Now, this is well into the destruction of the community as a result of that I-40, as a result of integration, and as a result of something else that I will share with you in a moment. This is a question she had. How many of you have witnessed a murder? How many of you have witnessed a shooting? How many of you have lost a relative to violence? How many of you have witnessed a violent death up close? When you witnessed this, did you ever receive any counseling? Mostly she found it was death by gunshots, and they had to be back at school within 2 days in order to stay on the school's lunch program, or they might not eat anything each day. Next. This is another quote from Baha'u'llah. When we talk about the distressing circumstances that have been and are taking place in North Nashville, this seemed an appropriate quote to insert. Be as a lamp unto them that walk in darkness, a joy to the sorrowful, a sea for the thirsty, a haven for the distressed, an upholder and defender of the victim of oppression. Baha'u'llah. Next. So Maxine did share that there were some interventions that they were able to do within the school system that were beneficial in some ways. One of these was the STARS program, and that stands for Students Taking a Right Stand. And this program was to help kids to be able to read, to graduate high school, and they even had a food den where kids could go for snacks or a meal since they often came to school hungry. She added that hungry kids have a very difficult time being able to focus and study. She developed an in-school family resource center, and this had social workers available to identify and work with kids to the extent that it was possible to do so based upon identified needs of the children and their families. There was a pharmacy with discounted medications, an advisory council that was made up of members of the community, including teachers, church leaders, students, and a professor from Fisk University. Next. This is another program in North Nashville that started in 2010, and it's described as a grassroots army for children. It was founded by Rashidat Vetuga, a former acting executive director of the Nashville chapter of the NAACP. What they did was employ a number of strategies to break the cycles that led to death or incarceration for too many Black youth. The newest prong in the Gideon's Army offensive is a crew of community members called violence interrupters, based on the model used by a Chicago-based organization called Cure Violence. Next. In North Nashville, she was able to find young people and train them to be violence interrupters. And what that meant is that they would walk the streets, literally looking for any situations where individuals are involved in conflict. And they would insert themselves into the middle of it to try to de-escalate the situation. Of course, that meant putting their own lives in danger. But so far, they have been very successful. There's another photo here of Rashadat teaching youth about conflict transformation. Next. Before we get into gentrification, we can stop there because we have a second poll. Nicola, it's up to you. Oh, before we do the poll, I would like to share something else. You can still stop sharing the screen. I wanted to share something else that had to do with the drugs. It's important to not leave this story of the destruction of North Nashville without giving due credit to the introduction of drugs into the community in the 1960s. And then at a federal level, passing a war on drugs bill that allowed the additional destruction of North Nashville along with its sister communities across the United States. The conscious and intentional decision to implement such an egregious additional element to these communities was instituted by the Nixon administration in the 1970s, an act to which one of Nixon's former cabinet members, John Ehrlichman, openly admitted. These are his own words. We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or Black, but by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and Blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. But that's another story having to do with the building of the prison industrial complex. So, Nicola.
Thank you, Sue. So we have seen some of the initiatives that people like Lisa and others in Nashville have done and been brave to and very courageous to mount these initiatives. So this next question is, in what ways can communities unite to make a difference after experiencing disruption caused by systemic racism? Please feel free to put your thoughts and your answers in the box there. And if you cannot access it, please, you can put it in the Q&A as well, as some others have been doing. And those who are on YouTube, we're going to be also sharing a QR code again that you can use.
Say God suffices all things, above all things, and nothing in the heavens or in the earth, but God suffices. Say God suffices all things, above all things, and nothing in the heavens or in the earth, but God suffices. Verily sustainer. Verily, he is in
We have about 30
himself the
seconds left.
knower, the sustainer. Verily, he is in himself the knower, the sustainer. Verily, he is in himself the knower, the sustainer. Beyond,
Okay, I'm going to give 5 more seconds. Okay, we have some responses here, so we can close the poll. Thank you. All right, so Chuck Edgerton says, with our local NAACP, we have engaged in a Juneteenth project to give names and voices to the enslaved people in our community, creating a 100 by 8-foot banner used to educate in the public schools. Regina Yonker is here. She said we can attend city council meetings in numbers with allies. I think this is Jassy Agdasi says love and justice. Yes, those are 2 very vital attributes. Mary McGregor says create community-based programs to help with hunger, housing, and education for the residents of all ages. Moving on, education about historical injustice so solutions can be made together, hearing authentic stories from individuals. Children's classes, junior youth groups, and lots of prayers. So thank you for those responses here, for participating in our poll. And in the second part of this webinar, I know that Sue and Chitra will be talking about some more solutions.
Thank you, Nikki. So now we have the latest violent impact. Remember, the World Health Organization stated that violence was not only against ourselves or others, but also against communities. Gentrification is another violence against North Nashville. The term gentrification refers to the urban planning projects that often displace working class families of color in order to open up residential and retail space for younger, wealthier, and whiter residents. These residents being pushed out are often long-term residents of the city, living in historically underdeveloped neighborhoods. They face displacement because of rising property taxes and predatory companies which seek to develop these areas of town through aggressive real estate investment. I have one more that I want to share before you change the slide. Now, some 150 years after freed slaves began settling here, the cycle of displacement is churning again. Gentrification, driven by Nashville's ascendancy as a new South metropolis, is uprooting scores of Black families and sending shockwaves through a community that has rarely known stability. All the while, the poison tree has borne fruit. North Nashville is plagued by a lack of opportunity and scant public investment. And alongside its rich cultural history is a history of poverty, crime, violence, aggressive policing, and mass incarceration. Next. And Lisa did start sharing some about this whole process. But after decades of distress and underinvestment, the 37208 is changing again. This time, more affluent newcomers are moving in, often with little or no knowledge of the history this place holds. Now, this is Lisa saying this part again. The current buying up of homes and land as a part of gentrification pushed people out of their community to areas further and further away from the inner city, which is now significantly gentrified. This quote is hers. Recently, as a part of this systemic process, the Ritz-Carlton Hotel has brought up more land and displaced more families. The government and corporate goal is to take over the whole area. I want to say that I went to a play Saturday night about Jefferson Street. And at the end of the play, one of the founders of an organization that's trying to save North Nashville indicated that the area where we were was all that is really left, and we want to try to save and protect it. And here are the ways in which you can get involved. It was obviously a traumatic statement for me to hear. Next. Oh, one more thing. Do you see what they're replacing? Go back one more again. I'm sorry. If you can see what they're replacing, individualistic homes that have character, their own architecture, with these bland concrete block homes that have no personality, no character. And this is what people are paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to live in. Next. Black places and Black people are disappearing again, demolished by development, raptured away by mass incarceration, or in many cases displaced amid gentrification, causing a significant decline over the past decade. The Black population dropped from 60% to 38%, the largest drop in Davidson County. The influx of developers and home flippers has acted as a new interstate, chewing up the vulnerable and putting immense pressure on everyone else. Mindy Fulilove, a professor of urban policy and health at the New School in New York, calls what has been happening in North Nashville, historically and currently, root shock. And these photos are an example of what it looks like to see these buildings going up and the character of the culture of the community disappearing. Next. This is just a list of some of the things that happen when gentrification takes place. Now remember, there was a time when all of the white people, they called it white flight. People that left the inner city and areas close to the inner city to get away from Black people and people of color. They moved to the suburbs. But now they find that it's beneficial for them to live downtown and close to downtown. And so the concept of entitlement allows them to feel like they can do exactly that. So they are they're forcing displacement of residents, loss of local livelihoods, displacement of long-term individuals, an erasure of the culture, destruction of the community's rich heritage, increasing the cost of living so that even if you're not living in the gentrified area, if you're living anywhere near it, and that means not just in Nashville, but in the communities that surround Nashville, you will find that it's very difficult to find a home or an apartment for rent that is reasonable for people who have what's considered in Nashville an average income of $45,000. Racial hostility and discriminatory behavior of the government and people in power, focus on spaces that exclude low-income individuals and people of color. I can't remember if it was Lisa or Bob that mentioned about the restaurants and the spaces that follow the people that moved into the community. And it's becoming, there's dog parks, and it's becoming a situation where these are places where if you were to walk in that area, you would find these places filled with white individuals now. Gentrification leads to, this was a surprise for me, 62% higher rate of firearm injuries over non-gentrified areas. I'm going to read this next quote, and then we have another poll, which will be the last one. Next. The world of man is sick, and that competent physician knoweth the cure, arising as he doth with teachings, counsels, and admonishments that are the remedy for every pain, the healing balm to every wound. It is certain that the wise physician can diagnose his patient's needs at any season and apply the cure. Wherefore, relate thou the teachings of Baha'u'llah to the urgent needs of this present day, and thou wilt see that they provide an instant remedy for the ailing body of the world. Indeed, they are the elixir that bringeth eternal health. Abdu'l-Baha. Nikki.
Thank you, Sue. So this is our last poll. And here it is. What are some ways that governments and residents can act to end gentrification? So please, we know that there are people in the attendee list who are, people who have a lot of experience with what has been happening in various states in the US and also in Canada. So please put your thoughts in the poll, and then we're going to share the QR code again for people who are on YouTube watching, or if you're having trouble with this poll in the Zoom, you can use the QR code instead.
Knower, the sustainer, verily is in himself a knower, the sustainer, verily is in himself a knower, the sustainer, beyond,
We have about 30 seconds left. Ten seconds. We're going to close the poll now. Thank you, Jocelyn, for that. Okay, so I see some six answers here. Carol says, invite town halls where voices of all residents can be heard. Go to village board meetings and advocate that all voices be heard and get the info to residents so they can attend the meetings. Regina says they can consult together about what each can contribute to benefit the neighborhood. Janae says, by putting necessary resources and services into the Black community when and where needed. Russell says, structure inclusive real estate development that invites existing community members to design affordable housing with an opportunity for creating innovative rejuvenation projects. Marianne says, affordable housing, vote for it. And so Hale says, cities can pass laws to restrict or limit certain types of developments that are contrary to the history of an area. So there are many things that friends have been doing in their communities, and these are some great ideas, and we'll explore it more in our Q&A. It's coming up, and also in the next webinar. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Nikki. And Ms. Sinclair, is there more slides that you have?
That actually ended the presentation. I ended it with
Okay.
that quote.
All right. Well, thank you so much for that informative, insightful, multidimensional presentation. We really appreciate it.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, that's not true. I'm just looking at my
Okay.
notes.
I thought there might be something else.
Yeah, we have, because we have to talk about what the Baha'i communities are doing in a certain area. We don't want to
Okay, I
miss out
thought
on
you
that.
were putting that for part 2, but let's go ahead and put it right here.
We could do it in part 2 again, too.
Yes.
I think I read, okay. So this is a quote from the Universal House of Justice. The experience of the Baha'i community may be seen as an example of this enlarging unity. It is a community of some 8 million people in 2020, drawn from many nations, cultures, classes, and creeds, engaged in a wider range of activities serving the spiritual, social, and economic needs of the peoples of many lands. It is a single social organism, representative of the diversity of the human family, conducting its affairs through a system of commonly accepted consultative principles and cherishing equally all the great outpourings of divine guidance in human history. If the Baha'i experience can contribute in whatever measure to reinforcing hope in the unity of the human race, we are happy to offer it as a model for study. Universal House of Justice wrote this booklet, The Promise of World Peace, for all of the leaders of all of the communities and nations of the world. Next. We could use this for next time, but I think I want to play at least part of it and then tease you with it. And then the next time we meet, you can see the full episode, because it's a little bit long to have at the end of this this particular webinar. But let's play some of it.
I'd say about 3 days after George Floyd was murdered, the community members here had barricades put up in the intersections around the area where he was killed, just to kind of keep it a pedestrian area. So the Baha'i Center is as close as you can get to the memorial while still being on the north side of the barricades.
After coming out of the gloom of the sadness of what we had witnessed, our family came to the Baha'i Center that's following Saturday to see what we could do. We brought our brooms and our garbage bags to see if we could clean the area and how we could help. We brought flowers, and we felt like we wanted to say prayers as a community. And as I approached the memorial, this powerful spirit just flowed through my body. I felt the presence of Abdu'l-Baha. The Native Americans had made it a sacred land. They had blessed the space. And there were people from all walks of life that had come in solidarity and in peace.